Let me show you one more connection. In 1860, David Wyrick, he's a guy who surveyed the Newark earthworks. He was digging into a mound near those earthworks and he found a wooden coffin made of oak. They opened up the coffin and found a skeleton of a man holding a little box. It was about 8.10 inches in size. The box had been cemented shut here. This, by the way, is sitting in Ohio.
Do you know that? Did you know that?
He opened up the box and he found a little man inside, a little black stone. They took it to scholars and they looked at it. The man seems to be carrying something, and there's writing here. At first, they couldn't recognize. The writing is, they thought in 1860, some sort of Hebrew. Well, finally, about 20 years later, they found some rabbis living in the area, and the rabbis looked at that, and they could read it. They said it was an old kind of block Hebrew, and it was a rendition of the Ten Commandments.
Did you know that?
This is another piece. Block Hebrew. They said they'd never seen anything like it. Mainstream archaeologists at the time called this a hoax. But then in 1900, or just about after 1900, in Israel, they found the same block-style Hebrew writing. Mainstream archaeologists still dismiss the findings. They found it in Israel, and they found it in Ohio.
Did you know that?
Do you live in Ohio, and did you know that? Why not? So what's going on here? What is that about? Where is that history? I'll show you in a few minutes, and we're going to have a conversation. I'm going to show you some more things that the Smithsonian, science, government, commerce colluded to erase.
Do you know that? Did you know that?
Reuben in Florida identified themselves as the Tribe of Reuben. Now, this was before Reuben lost their identity. Book here that you cannot get because it's out of print now, by Ronald Sanders, called Lost Tribes in the Promised Land. He actually went into the study trying to debunk the fact that the Indians here in the Americas, he was trying to debunk the fact that they are Israel. He tried to prove that they weren't Israelites. And through his research, going into their camp, grave grounds, going into the history, he found out the contrary. All right? And he took historical documents to put together this book. There's a passage when Montezinos came over here to the Americas, and I'm going to read it. It says, "Those Indians," he told himself, "they are Hebrews." Pondering this thought incredulously, and yet with growing conviction, he resolved that if he ever was released, he would seek out the Indian Francisco and try to learn the truth. So Montezinos was arrested, and he found out that, listen, these guys may be the Israelites. So when I get loose, I'm going to figure this story out. So he came over here. It says Montezinos' story unclear as to the circumstances of his incarceration is equally unclear as to those of his release. But released he was, and he immediately went to Francisco. Now, Francisco was an Indian, revealing himself as a Jew. Montezinos proclaimed his conviction that Francisco's hidden people were of the same race as he. Would Francisco lead them to them? The two men were soon back in the rugged mountains in which Francisco had made his initial revelation, marching relentlessly for a week before they finally came to a halt. It was a Saturday. That's the Sabbath. Montezinos makes a point of telling us, and they had come to a river larger than the Diero, and there are echoes of the Sabbatean and all of this. Here, Francisco announced, is where your brothers will be seen. Waving a banner high in the air, the Indian guide soon was greeted by a puff of smoke, the smoke signals that the Indians use here. Far beyond the other banks of the river, a response of his signal. The two men waited. Eventually, a canoe appeared, bearing 3 men and a woman, all of them Indians. to the place where Francisco and Montesinos were standing at the water's edge. So they communicated a signal to say, come on down. The Indians got in the canoe and made themselves known. The woman got off and spoke to Francisco in the Indian tongue that Montesinos could not understand, although he could perceive that he was being identified in the conversation. She then turned to her mate companions to explain the situation. Upon hearing her words, they rose and went over to Montesinos, and to his utter astonishment said, Shema Yasha'Allah, Alahayanawa Akkad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. They had recited in Hebrew the fundamental credo of Judaism. So when they came over here, the Indians were still speaking the Hebrew language. And we're going to show it, and you're going to pan it in. I'm going to show you. A brief conversation then ensued in their common ancestral tongue. According to Montesinos, whose fluency in it is almost perplexing to the reader of his narrative as it is that of the three mysterious new companions, they told him that they were themselves of the tribe of Reuben, same tribe we're reading of in Genesis the 49th chapter, finding the lost tribe. So we know that the tribe of Reuben is the Seminole Indians. Also, there's a residue in Australia, because it says they would not excel. You have the Aborigines, or the indigenous people of Australia, who are living in very subservient lifestyles at this point. So they also are part of Reuben in Australia. And that the tribe of Joseph lived on an island nearby. So not only did Reuben know who he was identifying that Ephraim, the son of Joseph, was on an island nearby. Now we have identified the first tribe, Reuben, the firstborn, Seminole Indians, and the Indian tribes, or the Aborigines of Australia.
So what's going on here? What is that about? Where is that history?
Okay, now we're going to go into Genesis and identify the lost tribes or sheep of Israel. Who are they? We're going into the beginning. Let's go to Genesis 49 and 1.
Genesis 49 and 1. And Jacob called unto his sons and said, Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days.
So he called his children together before he passed and says, Come, my sons, I will show you what will befall you in the last days. Now we're in the last days. So he was not talking about those children per se, but the seed of his children. What would be the condition of your children in the last days? This is how we can identify who the lost sheep are according to bloodline. Read.
Verse 2. Gather yourselves together and hear, ye sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father.
Israel your father. Who are the children of Israel? Read.
Reuben, thou art my firstborn.
Reuben was the firstborn. Now usually the firstborn inherits, or he's the heir or the heir of the father. He inherits all the blessings. But what happened to Reuben? Read.
Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power.
The excellency of dignity and the excellency of my power. They're the only Indian tribes that didn't make a peace treaty with the Europeans that came over here, because they had too much dignity to sign a peace treaty. And mind you, every peace treaty the Indians signed anyway was broken. So they had enough dignity to say, listen, I'm not signing no peace treaty.
So what's going on here? What is that about? Where is that history?
Did you know that?